You're just a guest in this house. Don't forget that. That's what my son-in-law said to me. On Christmas Day, in the house I'd been paying the mortgage on for 3 years, I set down my coffee mug on the kitchen counter slowly, carefully, and looked at him. He didn't look away. He actually meant it. I said nothing. I smiled, nodded, and walked back to the guest room to get my coat. 45 minutes later, I was sitting in my car in a Tim Hortons parking lot on Highway 11, watching the snow come down, and I made a decision that would change everything. My name is Gerald. I'm 68 years old. I spent 31 years as a civil engineer with the city of Sudbury, Ontario. I built bridges for a living, actual bridges, over actual rivers. I know how to calculate load-bearing capacity. I know exactly when a structure is being asked to carry more weight than it was ever designed to hold. I just didn't apply that knowledge to my own family, until it was almost too late. My wife Carol passed away 4 years ago. Pancreatic cancer. 11 weeks from diagnosis to funeral. She was 59. We'd been married 34 years, and I will tell you plainly that losing her was the kind of thing that reshapes a person from the inside out. You don't go back to who you were before. You become someone new, whether you want to or not. We had 2 children. Our son Patrick, 41, who lives in Kelowna with his own family and has always stood on his own 2 feet, and our daughter Diane, 37, who lives here in Northern Ontario with her husband, a man named Trevor, and their 2 kids, my grandchildren, Owen, 9, and Sophie, 6. Carol loved Diane fiercely. Diane was the younger one, the one who'd struggled a little more, dropped out of a college program, changed direction a few times, needed more patience. Carol gave her that patience without complaint. When Carol was dying, one of the last coherent conversations we had was about Diane. "Don't let her fall, Jerry," she told me. "Promise me." I promised her. I kept that promise. What I didn't anticipate was how thoroughly that promise would be used against me. The financial support started gradually, the way these things always do. A few months after Carol died, Diane and Trevor mentioned they were having trouble with rent. They'd been renting a place in town. Trevor worked in mining equipment sales, and there'd been a dry quarter. Could I help for a month or 2? Of course. I transferred $1,800 into their account. It was nothing. I had a good pension. The house was paid off. I had Carol's life insurance sitting in a TFSA I hadn't touched. But a month or 2 became 6 months. Then Trevor's company restructured and he was moved to a different territory, more travel, theoretically more commission, but unstable for a while. They needed more help. I started covering their full rent, then their car payment when the lease renewed. Then Diane mentioned the kids' school. They'd enrolled Owen in a French immersion program at a private school just outside town. Good for his development, she said, and the tuition was $9,200 a year. Could I help with that too? I looked at my spreadsheet. I'd started keeping one by then, and the total monthly support had reached $4,400. Rent $2,100. Trevor's truck lease $680. Owen's school $767. Groceries I was contributing to their Rogers bill because Diane said she needed a reliable plan for work calls. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself I was keeping my promise to Carol. I told myself that this was what family did. What I didn't tell myself, what I refused to examine, was that Trevor had stopped saying thank you somewhere around month 4, and that Diane had stopped asking and started informing me, not Dad. Could you possibly help with this? But Dad, I'm going to need you to cover the school deposit by the 15th. The shift was so gradual I almost didn't notice it. Almost. About 18 months ago, I brought up the idea of buying a small house. The rental market in Sudbury had gotten brutal, vacancy rates near 0. Prices up significantly since COVID, and I thought it would be a good investment, give Diane and Trevor stability, and eventually become an asset I could pass on. I found a 3-bedroom bungalow in a decent neighborhood. Reasonable bones, needed some cosmetic work. $387,000. I made an offer, it was accepted. I put down $100,000 from savings and took out a mortgage on the remainder at my age. With my pension income, the bank was comfortable lending. My monthly payment was $1,940. I did not charge Diane and Trevor rent. I told them to think of it as theirs to take care of. I paid the property tax. I paid the home insurance. I kept paying the other monthly expenses on top of that. By last spring, my total monthly outlay for Diane's household was just over $6,100. My pension between CPP, OAS, and my municipal pension comes to about $5,400 a month. I was drawing down my savings every single month to cover the gap. I told myself it was fine. I had enough. Carol's insurance had been substantial. But that's not the point, is it? The point is what was happening to all of us while the money kept flowing. Trevor had gotten comfortable in a way that made me uneasy. He drove the newer truck. He and Diane had taken a trip to Mexico in February, a resort in the Riviera Maya. I know because Diane posted photos and tagged the location. They'd asked me to watch the kids for the week, which I did, happily. I didn't ask who paid for the trip. I didn't want to know. Diane had stopped inviting me to things. Small things at first, a birthday dinner for Trevor's sister that I'd been included in before. A backyard barbecue with their friends. Then bigger things. When Owen had his hockey tournament in March, I heard about it afterward. I'd have driven 2 hours to watch that kid play. No one called. When I mentioned this to Diane, she sighed in a way that told me I was being tiresome. Dad, it's just easier sometimes. You know how Trevor gets. I did not know how Trevor got. Trevor and I had a perfectly civil relationship as far as I was aware. Evidently, in the version of events that existed inside that house, I was a complication. Still, I said nothing. I kept the money going. I told myself things would settle. Then came Christmas. I drove down on the 23rd. I'd bought gifts for everyone, a good telescope for Owen, who'd gotten interested in astronomy, craft supplies for Sophie, a cashmere sweater for Diane, and for Trevor, a very nice bottle of 40 Creek whiskey, because I'd heard him mention he liked it. I'd also brought a full turkey, a bag of groceries, and homemade butter tarts because Carol's recipe was the best, and Sophie had told me on the phone she wanted them. The first evening was fine. The kids were excited. Trevor was cordial. Diane seemed happy to see me. We watched a movie and I felt, briefly, like things were okay. Christmas morning was different. I'd slept in the guest room, the smallest bedroom, which was also used as a storage room, and I'd had to move a box of Trevor's hockey equipment to get to the closet. Small thing. I noted it. Breakfast was quiet. Trevor was on his phone most of the time. Diane was rushing around. The kids were tearing into their stockings. I helped Sophie with a knot in her stocking ribbon, and she climbed into my lap, and that was the best moment of the whole visit. It was mid-morning, maybe 10:30. Diane and Trevor had gone into the kitchen together, and I'd heard low voices, a disagreement of some kind. When Trevor came back out, his energy had shifted. He stood near the kitchen doorway and said directly to me, while Diane stood just behind him, "Jerry, just so we're clear on things. This is our home. We run things here. You're welcome to visit, but you're a guest. Don't go rearranging things or making yourself too comfortable." I looked at him. I looked at Diane. She looked at the floor. I said, "Understood." I got up, went to the guest room, put on my coat and boots, kissed Sophie on the top of her head, told Owen I'd call him about the telescope, said goodbye to Diane, who still wouldn't meet my eyes, and I walked out the door. I drove to Tim Hortons. I ordered a large dark roast. I sat in my car. I opened the notes app on my phone and started writing. I wrote for 40 minutes. Everything I'd spent in the last 3 years. Every amount, every month, everything I remembered. I wrote what Carol had asked me to do. I wrote what I had done. I wrote what had happened to me in that living room that morning. Then I called Patrick. Patrick listened without interrupting, which is not easy for him. He's a talker. Always has been. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Dad, when did you last do something just for yourself?" I couldn't answer him. I didn't know. He said, "You don't have to blow anything up, but you have to stop bleeding." I drove home to my house. It takes 2.5 hours. I was home by dinner. I heated up a bowl of soup, sat at my kitchen table with my laptop, and began to make a proper accounting of everything. The number, when I added it all up, 3 years of support, the down payment on the house, the ongoing mortgage, the car, the school, the groceries, the bills was $198,400. I sat with that number for a long time. I want to be clear about something. I am not a vindictive person. I am not someone who acts out of spite. I spent 31 years in municipal engineering, and I will tell you that the job teaches you to be precise and deliberate. You do not reroute a river because you're angry at it. You study the situation, you consider the consequences, you make a plan, and you act on the plan. I gave myself 2 weeks. I did not call Diane. She called me twice, once on Boxing Day, once on New Year's Eve. I let both calls go to voicemail. The messages were brief. Just checking in, Dad. No mention of what Trevor had said. No apology. Just the ordinary pretense that nothing had happened. In those 2 weeks, I did 4 things. First, I met with my financial advisor at the Scotiabank branch, where I've been a client for 22 years. I told him what had been going out and what I wanted to stop. He did not seem surprised. In fact, he made a sound that suggested he'd been waiting for this conversation. He helped me identify every automatic transfer and payment associated with Diane's household. There were 11 of them. Second, I called a family law lawyer in Sudbury, a woman I was referred to by a colleague's wife who'd been through a complicated estate situation. I explained the house. She explained my options. Since the house was in my name alone, Trevor had asked at one point to be added to the title, and I had. I think whatever instinct guided me said I'd think about it and never followed up. I had straightforward options available to me. I could sell. I could issue a formal notice to vacate. I could formalize the arrangement with a rental agreement and charge market rent. I chose to consult further before deciding, but I left that meeting knowing I held more cards than I'd realized. Third, I set up a registered education savings plan, an RESP for Owen and Sophie. I put $8,000 in immediately and named myself as subscriber, with the children as beneficiaries. Whatever happened between me and their parents, those kids would have something for their future that no one could spend on a Mexican resort. Fourth, on the second Saturday of January, I canceled every automatic payment. I did it one by one. The mortgage payment, the truck lease contribution, which went directly to Trevor's account, the school tuition pre-authorized debit, the grocery e-transfer that went out on the 1st of every month, the Rogers bill, all 11 of them. Each one had a little confirmation screen asking if I was sure. Each time I clicked yes. It took about 25 minutes. I did not call Diane to tell her. I sent her a letter, a real letter, printed, signed, mailed with a stamp that I had drafted carefully over several days. It said that effective immediately I would no longer be providing financial support to her household. It said that I remained her father and I loved her, but that I had reached a point where continuing was not something I was able to do. It said that the house remained in my name and that I would be in touch separately about that arrangement. It said that my grandchildren were my grandchildren and that I hoped to maintain a relationship with them independent of whatever happened between the adults. It did not mention Christmas. It did not mention Trevor. It did not explain itself beyond what was necessary. I mailed it on a Tuesday. By Thursday afternoon, my phone was ringing continuously. First Diane, then a number I didn't recognize, Trevor, calling from what I later learned was his work phone, because I'd apparently blocked his personal number at some point, without realizing it. Then Diane again. Then my sister Joan, who lives in Barrie, which told me Diane had called her. Then a number with a Kelowna area code Trevor had called Patrick, which Patrick texted me about immediately. He called me. I told him I had no comment. You okay? I was okay. I let everything go to voicemail. There were 22 missed calls by Friday morning. I checked them only to make sure none were from Owen's school or a number I didn't recognize as family. None were. I listened to Diane's messages in order. The first one was confused. She'd seen the mortgage hadn't gone through. Thought there might have been a bank error. The second one was sharper. She'd looked at the other accounts. The third one, recorded Thursday evening, was where she found her full voice. She was crying, but the crying had that particular edge in it that was more anger than grief. She said I was being cruel. She said the kids didn't deserve this. She said after everything she'd been through losing her mother, she couldn't believe I would do this to her. She said Trevor had only been trying to establish healthy boundaries. I noted the phrase. It had the sound of something rehearsed, and that I was punishing her for his words. I listened to the whole message twice. Then I set the phone down and went for a walk. There's a trail that runs along Ramsey Lake near my house. Carol and I used to walk it on Sunday mornings. In January, it's cold and quiet, and the ice on the lake makes sounds sometimes deep, resonant cracks that carry a long way. I walked for an hour. I thought about Carol. I thought about what she'd actually asked me to do, not to let Diane fall. She hadn't asked me to hold Diane up indefinitely, so she never had to try. There's a difference. I understood that now with a clarity I wished I'd had sooner. I replied to Diane's messages with a single text message. I received your messages. I love you and the kids. My decision stands. When you'd like to talk calmly, I'm here. She did not respond for 11 days. Trevor called my sister twice more. Joan, to her credit, told him she wasn't a mediator, and he should speak to me directly. He did not. A man who talks about establishing healthy boundaries tends to lose his vocabulary when he's the one who needs to do the work. The house situation took longer to sort through. In February, I met again with the lawyer, and we drafted a formal notice, not an eviction, but a formal document, stating that the property arrangement would be formalized or terminated within 90 days. I was offering two options: a lease agreement at $1,850 per month, which was below market rate for comparable properties in the area, or an agreed-upon timeline for them to find other accommodations. I had the document delivered by a process server because I'd been advised that was cleaner. I know how that sounds. I'm not proud of the formality, but I'd learned by then that informal arrangements with people who redefine words like family and guest tend to go the way you'd expect. Diane called me the evening she received the document. This conversation was different from the voicemails. The anger had burned through to something quieter. She said, "Dad, are you really going to make us move?" I said, "Diane, I offered you two options. One of them lets you stay." She was quiet. Then she said, "Trevor won't sign a lease with you. He says it's humiliating." I said, "Okay." I waited. She said, "What do I do?" I said, "That's between you and Trevor. I hope you'll make the decision that's right for your children." Another silence. Then she said, very quietly, "I'm sorry about Christmas. I should have said something." I said, "I know. I meant it." They chose to sign the lease. Trevor never spoke to me directly about it. Diane handled the paperwork. They moved to a below-market rent in a house they didn't have to leave. The mortgage, now covered by their payment, costs me nothing out of pocket. What changed was everything that the money had been covering up, something I've been told by a few people since this all happened. My doctor, actually, and a friend from my old engineering days, is that they'd been worried about me, not about the money, about me, the way I'd shrunk, the way I'd stopped talking about my own plans. I'd been so focused on the structure I was holding up that I'd stopped living in my own. I booked a trip, March break, while the grandkids were on school holidays. I went to Cape Breton, not the Caribbean, not a resort. Cape Breton in early spring, which sounds bleak and is actually extraordinary. I hiked part of the Cabot Trail. I stayed in a small inn where the owner made oatcakes every morning. I read 3 novels. I called Patrick and we talked for an hour about nothing important, which was the best conversation I'd had in years. When I got back, I called Diane and asked if I could take Owen and Sophie for a weekend. She said yes without hesitation, which told me something had shifted. I took them to Science North. We ate at a diner on Elgin Street, and Sophie put ketchup on her mac and cheese, and Owen told her that was disgusting, and she told him she didn't care. And I sat there watching my grandchildren argue about condiments, and felt something in my chest loosen that had been tight for a very long time. Owen asked me in the car on the way home, "Grandpa, are you and Mom fighting?" I looked at him in the rearview mirror. "We had a disagreement," I said. "Grown-ups have them sometimes. The important thing is we're working through it." He nodded like that was acceptable. Then he said, "Good, because we need you at Easter." I told him I'd be there. I've thought a lot about Carol's words since all of this. Don't let her fall, Jerry. Here's what I've come to understand. Catching someone every time they slip is not the same thing as letting them fall. If I run alongside someone for 3 years, arms out, and they never once look down to find their footing, I'm not helping them walk. I'm just making it possible for them to forget they have legs. Diane has legs. She always did. I just couldn't see that through my own guilt and grief. And the weight of a promise I'd interpreted too broadly. There's a conversation I want to have with her about Carol, about those years about what we both lost and what we both let happen. I think we'll get there. She's been calling more regularly. Not about money, just to talk. Last week she told me a funny story about Owen's teacher that made me laugh out loud in my kitchen. That's something. Trevor remains polite in the distant way of a man who knows he overstepped and isn't quite ready to say so. I'm not holding my breath. Some structures take longer to settle than others, but I'm not standing underneath them anymore, holding them up by hand. My pension still comes in on the last Wednesday of every month. My TFSA is recovering slowly. The rest for the grandkids grows with every contribution, and the government grants on top. My house on the lake trail is quiet in the evenings, and I have learned, at 68, that quiet is not the same as lonely. It took me longer than it should have to know the difference. I finished building bridges for the city of Sudbury in 2019. Good bridges, solid work. Most of them will outlast me easily. But the best thing I've built since I retired, the thing I'm most careful about now, is the boundary between what I'll give and what I'll give up. Carol would understand. I think she'd even be proud. I still make her butter tart recipe at Christmas. Sophie still asks for them specifically. Some things you pass down on purpose. Some things you stop passing down when you realize they're emptying you out instead of filling anyone up. I know the difference now.